We're going to begin with a goodbye, a farewell to one of the greatest names in American music.
The last time I saw Paris, her heart was warm and gay. I heard the
Tony Bennett, who started performing in the 1940s, who left his heart in San Francisco in the 1960s and rocked it with Lady Gaga 60 years later, died overnight at the age of 96. He had retired not all that long ago after he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Music kept him going into that 10th decade. And Anthony Mason spoke to Bennett about a decade ago about that unbelievably brilliant career, which lasted on the stage through 2021, and at the time of this conversation you're about to hear, was very much going strong.
So you're not thinking about retiring or anything?
Not at all.
No.
No, I have a lot to learn. When I was young, I thought I knew everything. Mm-hmm. And at my age now, I realize I've got so much more to learn.
Bennett doesn't spend much time strolling down memory lane these days. The man Frank Sinatra once called the best singer in the business is simply too busy.
I'm 86 and I've never been hotter. It's so funny, I'm sold out all over the world.
Uh-huh. What happened?
It worked.
And Anthony Mason joins us now for more on all this. Anthony, I see you smiling. I see you laughing. You're at your apartment here in New York City. When you heard the news this morning, what were your first impressions, your thoughts, your memories of the great Tony Bennett?
Well, I'll tell you, Tony, I mean, Tony Bennett was present for so long, it's just almost impossible to believe he was gone. I don't know anybody in music who had a career that had the longevity that he had, who had the influence that he had. He was arguably, as Sinatra said, the greatest singer of our time. But he was one of the most illustrious, one of the most influential, and he also staged one of the most extraordinary comebacks in music history. I mean, you mentioned his career started in the 40s. It was Pearl Bailey, if you remember that name, who actually gave him his big break in 1949. She put him on her show, and his name then was Anthony Benedetto. That was his birth name, and it was Bob Hope who came backstage and said, "You need to be called Tony Bennett, and you're coming on tour with me." And that was the big break that Tony Bennett got. And 2 years later, he had it in 1951. Because of You was his first #1 song. That's how far back Tony Bennett goes. It was 1962 when I Left My Heart in San Francisco, kind of became his signature song. But then shortly after that, the Beatles hit the shores of the U.S. and music got turned upside down. And slowly, Tony's career waned. And by the late 70s, nobody really wanted to hear him sing. And he was in trouble with the IRS. He'd lost his manager. He had no label. He actually had an overdose, and he appealed to his sons. And it was his son, Danny, who in the early 80s began initiating the comeback that would become extraordinary. And one of the things I remember distinctly was going to a movie premiere here in New York. With my daughter, who was then about 13, she had a friend. We were standing at the backstage waiting for all the celebrities from the premiere to come out. And Tony Bennett walked out. And the kids went, they gasped. And I said, "How do you know Tony Bennett?" And they said, "He's the one who sings with Lady Gaga." That was a genius stroke because it took Tony to a younger audience. That's what his son helped engineer. But the point was his singing skills and his music resonated with everybody. Tony was an exceptional singer. I mean, he didn't just have a great voice. His phrasing was really extraordinary. I remember watching him just down the street here at the Rose Theater in Lincoln Center do a concert with Gaga. And it was one of those that stopped and started because they were taping it for an audience. And Tony, when Gaga was off stage changing costumes, as she frequently did, Tony would banter with the audience. He was very genial, even in his mid to late 80s. And then he sang a song called How Do You Keep the Music Playing by James Ingram, wrote it back in 82. Beautiful song, not easy to sing. In his late 80s, he hit every high note and also had the ability to make you feel like he was talking to you, not singing to you. And I was almost in tears that night that this man who in his late 80s could still do that. And even when you started seeing his memory failing from Alzheimer's, he could still go out on stage. Once the music started playing, all of that skill came out. It was really amazing.
Yeah, it really is a career that will be talked about for decades to come. Many will try to follow in his footsteps. Few will succeed. It is that giant of a career. Anthony Mason, thank you very much for helping us remember it.